Hi, this is Edward Troxel. In today's tutorial we're going to continue where we left off in the previous one. In the previous one we showed how we could call the renderer in 3 different ways, but we only called it to render the full project. In this tutorial we're going to add the 3 options on the screen so we can choose which method we use, and we're also going to add a 4th method which will let us render for any markers that have a length to them. So if you have a standard marker that has length to it, so it becomes a region, we will render for each one of those regions. So let's get started. For today's tutorial we're going to start a little different and have the code already typed in. So I will go through all the extra code that was added to make everything work so that you'll know what needs to be added to your code. First of all, let's start with the index.html file, and previously we had the select the render preset file and the preset file and the hpreset file IDs. Then we had the destination folders with the regular and hidden render destinations, and then we finally added the file name at the bottom, and then at the very bottom was the run button, which is still there, but now we're going to add these radio buttons in between. So the first line is going to be input type equals radio in quotes, the ID equals project, because this is going to be our entire project radio button. The name is render. The name is going to be the same for all 4 of them. Then I'm going to give this a value of 1. And then, unlike the other 3 options, I am going to say checked equals true. That means this button will be checked when the screen is first brought up, whereas the other 3 buttons will not be. But as we select the other 3 buttons, then this one will become unchecked as well. So that will get the button on the screen. Now we need a label for that button. So we're going to have label 4, and then this needs to match the ID, so for project. And then we're going to add the style equals color and white. That will let us be able to see it on the black screen. And then we're going to type in the name for this one, which is entire project. Now what you can do is just take these 3 lines and copy and paste them 3 more times. Get rid of the checked equals true. Then you can change the value from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. Change the name that is going to appear on the screen. For the second one, let's make it work area. For the third one, let's make it the in out area. And then for the 4th one, we're going to add a new option, and we're going to call it marker regions. For the work area, let's change the ID here and here to work area. Then let's change the ID here and here for the in-out to in-out. And then for the region, let's change the ID here and here to region. So as you can see, all 4 sets are very, very similar to each other. Now that we have the options listed on the screen, we have to pass the information over to the extend script side. So if you recall, up here at the top, we have the run all button, which passes this information to Premiere. What we're going to do here is we are now going to add 4 new variables, one for each one of those regions. I'm going to add a project flag, which is document.getElementBy, and then the ID, which is project. The work area flag, which will be for work area. The in-out flag, which will be for in-out, and then the region flag, which will be for region. Then from those, I am going to set my render type. I'm going to assume that a render type of 0 is no render at all. So then let's go through and look at these 4 flags, and if you recall, we set them to be a value of 1, 2, 3, or 4. And so we're going to get that value up here. So if it was the project flag, let's just get the project flag.value, which in this case would be 1. If the work area was checked, let's get the work area value, which is 2. If the in-out flag was checked, then let's get the in-out value, which is 3. If the region flag was checked, let's get the region flag value, which is 4. And then we need to add it to our render call. The last time we had preset.enterHTML, the outfolder.enterHTML, the filename.value, and we quit right there. So now we need to add another ending quote, quote, comma, quote, beginning quote, and then we will add our new render type, before adding our closing brackets again. And that is the only changes you need on the index.html side. So now let's move over to the extend script side. This is the side that actually runs inside Premiere. Now if you recall, we are now adding a new variable, so we need to add comma render type here so that we can receive the render type that they chose. Then let's pass it on to the render command, so we'll just add comma render type there, and then in the render command we have to add it here as well. As we scroll down, the render routine really has not changed until we get down to the bottom. When we get down to the bottom, I moved my job ID variable out to the outside of all these if statements. So now I set the job ID to null, and then I go through and see which type of render did we want to do. If it's type 1, then we want to do the full project, which as we can see, 1 is encode entire. If we have a 2, then we want to encode the work area. If we have a type 3, then we want to encode in and out. So as you can see, those are the 3 lines that we had previously created. So now we've added the choice so that we can pick any of those 3. But I wanted to go ahead and add a 4th type here, which will let us render regions. What I'm doing here is I'm going to call another routine so that I don't have to put everything right here in this if statement and clutter up this routine, and it'll just make everything cleaner. So I'm going to call another routine, and I decided to call it R regions, and then I'm going to pass this information to it. So we're going to pass the preset that we're using, we're going to pass the output folder that we're using, we're going to pass the base file name that we wanted to use, and I'm going to pass the file extension because I don't want to look it up again. Below the render routine, I added the new function called RRegions. I do have to get the active sequence again because I'm going to be using that in several places here. What I decided to do is, if we look at our Premiere project here, I have added some markers here and given them some length. So if we look at these, I have 4 markers here that have a length, and then I have 1 marker that has no length. That is just for testing purposes. You can see here this is the project we were using before that also has an in and out area, and that will come into play after a while as well. So we have 3 with names, 1 with no length and no name, and 1 with no name. The first thing we're going to do is get our active sequence, and then what I want to do is get the in and out points and save them. We're going to save them in these 2 variables. So we're going to save this point right here and this point right here because we want to be able to put those back when we're done. The next thing we're going to do is get our list of markers and get the number of markers that we have. We're going to set our first marker to null, and like I did up above, I want to go ahead and take my job ID and set it to null. So that way, if we actually have nothing to process, we will be able to determine that. Now I'm going to start my for loop, and I'm going to start with I equals 0, and as long as it's less than marker count, we're going to keep incrementing it. If it is the first one, then I have to call get first marker. From that point forward, we're going to be calling get next marker. If it's the first time, we have to get the first marker. If it's from that point forward, what I did here is I've moved the current marker into a cur marker variable, and then I've set my marker again and to the get next marker after cur marker. I could get by without using this other variable. I just thought it might look a little cleaner to go ahead and add it. So we could have put my marker right here as well. So now we need to see if the marker itself has a length. If the end dot seconds is not equal to the start dot seconds, so if it has a length, then we're going to process it. Otherwise, we ignore it. So in the case of our second marker on our timeline, these 2 are going to be the same value because it starts and ends at the same place. But for the other 4, these 2 values are going to be different. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the endpoint to the beginning of that first marker, and then I'm going to set the out point to the end of that first marker. So the endpoint that we have on the timeline is going to actually change to be over that first marker area. Then we have to figure out what our file name is going to be. Up here, we were able to get our file name all in one line. Down here, it's a little more complicated. Here we're going to start the same way. We're going to start with the folder and the separator. But then we're going to add to the file name depending on what the marker has. If the marker name is not nothing, then let's add the marker name and a space to that file name. So the three that we have named, it will get the name and add them on here. Otherwise, I want to put a count on here. Add those in there for testing. We don't need those anymore. What I want to do is, my count is basically I, but our i's are 0 based, whereas when we look at a marker, we tend to think of 1 based. So let's go ahead and add 1, and we will call that our region count. And then we will add to our file name the word region plus the region count plus the space. After that, we're going to go ahead and, like we did before, we're just going to add the file name dot extension, and now we have the full file name. The next step is to send the job to Media Encoder, and we are going to use the encode in to out because that's the method we're using to define the area. Once we get done with that job, we'll go up and process the next marker and so forth until we get done with all the markers. After we're finished with all of the markers, then we're going to come down here and reset the endpoint and the out point to the values that we saved at the beginning. And then when we're done at the bottom, if we did a job, then it will no longer be null, and we will get a message saying that these jobs were sent to Media Encoder. So now that we have these changes made, let's test it out and see what happens. So we go to Window, Extensions, and run our render script. And then we click here and pick our preset. Click our destination folder. We'll just use the same one we've been using in the past examples. I'm going to call this region test, and you can see here we have all the various options here, and when you select one, the others become unselected. And for this one, we're going to do marker regions. So now let's click on render. And you can see as it progressed, it moved the in-out area to each one of these 4 sections, and then it listed the number for the last job that it sent. Now when we come over to Media Encoder, you can see that we have 4 jobs listed, 1 for each region. And the first one says Region 1, Region Test. Region Test was the file name that we entered, so they all 4 have Region Test. The first one says Region 1 because it did not have a name. The second one says Gift Table 1, third one says Gift Table 2, and the fourth one says Over 2 Images because the last 3 had those names listed in it. And so now if we just clicked the green Start button, we would get all those files rendered into the Watch Render Test folder. As you can see, adding the extra options were fairly easy for the first 3. The fourth one required quite a bit of work in that we had to go through each of the regions to figure out what region we were supposed to be rendering. And we used the in and out points to make it easier to select which sections we were going to use, but then we restored the in and out point at the end. If you have any ideas for any future videos you want to see, please let me know. Please sign up at www.JETDV.com and subscribe on YouTube to get further notifications on when new videos are presented.